Hello, good morning, and welcome to Line by Line Bible Studies. My name is Paul Strangini. We're in the book of Matthew, chapter 24, as it said. First couple of verses, this chapter we kind of covered at the end of the study on Friday. He iterates something about Jerusalem that, as they show him the great buildings of the temple, he declares that, look at all these buildings, there's not going to be left one stone upon another that shall not be thrown down. And, that is part of a repeating pattern throughout the Bible. Not just in the history of Israel, such as when the Babylonians destroyed their temple, but just in the course of events in human history. It's why giving heed to the words of the prophets and of the Lord are so important. Or at least they're a clear and dire warning. And you look, it doesn't just begin with the Babylonian captivity, but it goes back to the flood. The story of the flood, the Tower of Babel, Sodom and Gomorrah. That when we allow ourselves to get so far out of alignment with the right way, things have a way of catching up. And pretty soon we find that our cities have been leveled and our civilizations destroyed. And he had just come away from looking at all the hypocrisy of their religion. When was it Alexis de Tocqueville? I forgot who it was. He came and visited America. I forgot who it was. I think it was a Frenchman. I think. And he was trying to figure out what made America great back then. And this is back in the 1800s, I guess. And, he tried to look at it from an economic standpoint, from a political standpoint. But what he settled on was that, when he walked into the churches and saw their pulpits aflame with righteousness. And then I forget if he declared, if America ceases to be good, or I'll say ceases to be godly, it will cease to be great. And in Israel, when they ceased to be godly, to follow the Lord, they ceased to be great. You look at the way Germany went about prosecuting World War II in such depths of depravity and hypocrisy and unrighteousness. And look how great their fall was. Thanks. So, this is the conclusion of what Jesus was getting at in chapter 23. Woe unto you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites! Your city is left unto you desolate, because it's going to be thrown down. Because it's the honest and righteous pursuit of the proper course that makes nations strong, doing the right thing. But when they get all off into excusing unrighteousness, into depravity and corruption of their institutions, the fall is inevitable. It may be delayed, but it is inevitable. Or at least the fall of that order, and maybe there's always the possibility of reformation and restoration before ultimate destruction. Okay, let's continue in verse 3. And as he sat upon the Mount of Olives, the disciples came unto him privately, saying, and I'm going to text up properly. Tell us, when shall these things be? And what shall be the sign of thy coming and of the end of the world? As I said, this is a cyclical thing, but it has a culmination. The cyclical thing only goes back to the beginning, of course, in which all, the beginning, before the beginning of history, we don't have real cycles. Well, before the beginning of history, history is just what we remember. The flood is, to me, a culmination of all history prior to what men know as history. It's like the lesson of chaos, the lesson of when men's hearts go continually after evil, what befalls the world. And ultimately, since men never cease in this, it's going to, like the Tower of Babel, get bigger and bigger and bigger until it engulfs the whole world. And then the world will be caught up in the flames of the destruction of men's foolishness. That's how it comes about. The world is ended because of the stupidity of men. And I'll say stupidity. I don't call individuals stupid, but humanity I will call stupid. Because we know to the degree that we know what is right, but we can't find a collective way to do it. Because we can't collectively agree on what's right. And when we do, it ends up being the Tower of Babel, not paradise on earth. It ends up being the reign of Antichrist, which is the music I chose to open the study with is chapter 13 of Revelation. And Jesus answered and said unto them, Take heed that no man deceive you. For many shall come in my name, saying, I am Christ, and shall deceive many. I always thought the punctuation, well, there's no punctuation here in the King James, but I always thought the punctuation on this verse is extremely important. Because people, even when I was young, when I read this casually, I thought, okay, all kinds of people are going to come saying, I'm Jesus, look at me, my name is Johnny Walker, and I'm Jesus. But it should be more taken in the sense, or at least I believe this is every bit as plausible interpretation, and actually more plausible, because there have been some who've come saying that they are Christ, claiming there have been false messiahs, I suppose. How many? How many people call themselves Messiah? I am your Messiah. Can we call that number anything like many? I can't. So, the way I read this is they say that Jesus, who is the speaker here, reflexively, and he's using this I in a reflexive sense, like when they say, many are going to come in my name. And again, notice my name. Many shall come in my name, meaning he's speaking in the first person, saying, I am Christ, speaking of himself, meaning that the people are going to come saying, well, Jesus is the Christ. That's why you got to be careful about people deceiving you. I mean, it's one level of deceit for someone to come to you saying that they themselves are Christ, but it's entirely another level of deceit for them to come to you saying that Jesus is Christ, and I come in the name of Jesus. In fact, if I apply that understanding that, this refers to people who say they follow Jesus and say they affirm Christ, now I can readily see how there are many deceivers going out into the world. I can just flip on the television, if there still is television. I don't know. When I moved out of the city, I didn't bother to get broadcast television. And when you go on the internet, you go on YouTube and stuff, they tailor your choices based on what you watch. I mean, the things they offer you to watch are tailored to what you've watched in the past. So I haven't shown any, I don't know how much televangelist material there is on YouTube, but I certainly haven't gone looking for it, so I don't get exposed to it. But I assume that many of them are still on television, I guess. I mean, it would please me to no end if that was dying. It's a little piece of history that would be best buried. The era of the televangelist. It's not that I don't want evangelism on television. Not that there aren't people who would be, I would consider marginally acceptable, let's just say. But there are a lot of deceivers, as I talked about before, whose primary purpose is to collect money and to sell merchandise and to make you merchandise. And they're willing to tell you whatever they think you want to hear in order to get that. Now, that's so dangerous, because what you want to hear is not necessarily what you need to hear. You know what I mean? Like if I go to a doctor, what I want to hear is, you're in perfect health. But maybe what I need to hear is, you need to lose some weight, or you need, you've got high cholesterol. You got to change your diet. I mean, I don't want to hear someone tell me I got to change my diet. I don't want to hear someone tell me I've got some sort of problem. I want to hear you've got a perfectly clean bill of health. I'm not a hypochondriac. I don't want to hear I'm sick. And what a prophet often does is tells people, you're sick. Your society is sick. The world is sick. It needs to be healed. Like Jesus said of, the publicans and the harlots, they that are whole need not a physician. He goes to people who are aware of their sinful condition, or at least willing to listen to one who says, you're ill. And they say, yes, you're right. I am full of sin and iniquity, and I need reformation. So how can I be helped? But people who say, no, it's perfectly fine. I know I'm fine. And I can't, and I'm not willing to listen to you. In fact, who are you to speak ill of me, or declare me sick or ill or a hypocrite? In fact, when you do that, that's what the whole movement and politically these days, that's where political correctness leads. And where the, our entire culture is like, and it's annoying me online because I'm creating an online ministry, but like we're moving into a world where like, sorry I keep saying like so often, but whatever. Can you tell I was born in 1973? We're moving into a world where they make you, as the prophet Isaiah says, where they make a man a sinner for his words. And they make a man, and guilty of an offense for speaking the truth, essentially. Like where you are afraid to speak about certain things because, you may, if it's seen online, your employer may not want to, may want to fire you. There have been people for comments on like little Twitter and all that stuff. I don't engage in Twitter, but people make comments on there and then they get fired for saying insensitive things. How are we going to speak the truth to each other if your entire livelihood is going to be destroyed because you said something that's not sensitive to someone else? I don't want to hear that. That makes me uncomfortable. If that happens, we're doomed, because we can't speak the truth to each other anymore. We can't tell each other what it means to be sinful and in need of healing. And well, I don't agree with your definition of sinful. Well, fine. It's not just because someone says something doesn't mean you have to listen to it. But no, I don't even want them to say so. I don't want to hear it. That's the most dangerous kind of, because it's like you're just ripe for deceit. All someone has to do is come in and say the things you want to hear. And then you are carried away in your deceit. So, false Christians are the most dangerous thing as far as deceit. It's like when Satan used the scriptures to tempt Christ, and he in interesting ways. Like Satan suggested a fundamentalist interpretation of the Psalms. He will give his angels charge over you, and they will bear you up in their wings, lest at any time thou dash thy foot against a stone. And there you go. Taken out of context and quite literally, it means throw yourself down. Something. Well, if you believe in your heart that God raised him from the dead and you confess the name of the Lord Jesus, you will be saved. with no other considerations at all. Is that so? I feel like I want to just talk about that for a long time, but I want to move on. I'm going to move on. Two competing desires, to move on and yet to continue. But there'll be more to say. What am I going to say? You know, when we don't want to hear the truth, deception is the next thing that comes. We got to keep our minds open to the truth and to the idea that, like, well, we may not have it. And it may not be something that we like to hear. It may not be where we want to go with our life experience, mental landscape. And ye shall hear of wars and rumors of wars. See that ye be not troubled, for all these things must come to pass, but the end is not yet. One thing that drives me nuts is, like, you know, is all the prophetic speculation. And it's always around the wars and rumors of wars. It's like, they think, I don't know how many times you've heard it. It's been plenty of times where people say, you know, the signs of the end are this wars and rumors of wars. That's the signal that the end times are here. And it's the exact opposite of what Jesus said. He's saying, don't let these things trouble you. There's always going to be wars and rumors of wars, and these are not signs of the end. Though there is war in the end, there is a war to be fought, a battle. The Battle of Armageddon, for one. And there will be a rumor of war go forth at the end, like the sixth trumpet. The 4 angels that are bound in the great river Euphrates are loosed. And their purpose is to see a third part of men slain. For nation shall rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom. And there shall be famines, and pestilences, and earthquakes in diverse places. All these are the beginning of sorrows. When he says the beginning of sorrows, let's relate that to an English idiom, the way I read this. Because you got it in the context. He's saying the roars and rumors of wars are not a sign of the end. A nation is going to rise up against nation, and there's going to be famines and pestilence. And then the false prophet comes in and says, these are the beginning of... Aha, these are the initial signs of the end times. No, they're not. They're not the initial signs. When you start seeing these things increasing, the end times are coming. No, they're wrong. These are the beginning of sorrows. Let's put that in an idiom we might be familiar with. This is the tip of the iceberg. This is the edge of the sorrow. This is the beginning of the sorrows. This is not the beginning of the tribulation. His whole point of mentioning these things is to dismiss them as signs. These are not the signs, and I can prove it. Look back the past 2,000 years and tell me if there have not been famines, pestilences, earthquakes in diverse places, wars and rumors of wars, nation against nation, kingdom against kingdom. It's called history. It's not the beginning of the tribulation. And the rate of these things over time has fluctuated. So when you have a fluctuating rate of natural disasters and man-made disasters fluctuating over time, how could you say that any particular upswing in the number is not going to be followed by a perfectly normal downturn in such events? And in fact, despite all the lying of all the false prophets and of the prognosticators, there is no current increase in the number of naturally caused disasters. They say, well, Paul, the intensity is up. We have bigger... No. We just have more people. They say, well, the last hurricane did $2 billion worth of damage, and the most recent one did $10 billion worth of damage. That's because we put $10 billion worth of stuff in the way of the earthquake or the hurricane, whatever. We put more stuff in the path. The hurricane itself is not particularly stronger. It's not some superstorm. It's just we put a super large amount of stuff on the coasts of our continent, and when the hurricane comes through, it finds so much more to break. You cannot count the severity of anything based on the monetary damage it does, because that's going to vary based on what's in the path of the thing that's coming to destroy everything. I mean, it's just simple logic. It's not, there is no, there is no this sort of like constant increasing frequent drumbeat of like earthquake, 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 earthquake. Because they'll say sorrows here, and I believe it is here. Let's just double check it. In the good old, I don't know if this is very counter the way people usually teach it. They always want to make it. I'll tell you what you want to hear is, what do you want to hear? I know what I want to hear. The end times are here. It's the end of the world, and Jesus is coming right around the corner. Yep, any day now. He could appear at any time because all the signs are in place. All the everything is right falling into line. It's all happening right now. You're living in the most exciting time in human history because the end times are upon you and blah, blah, blah. It's just all a bunch of flattery and false teaching and false prophecy. We are in no such period. Bad news. Now the signs could start coming. I'll tell you what, we are, regardless of what happens, we are heading into a difficult point in human history. A dangerous place in human history. We've been living in one the whole time we've been alive. I tell you what, some people have. It's pretty dangerous to live in Iraq and Syria, 5 years ago or whatever. I don't, the exact. I'll tell you the truth. From 2008 to 16, I almost watched zero news. I didn't pay attention to anything that was going on in the world. From time to time, I do that. I sort of step out and just like, you know what? I don't really want to pay attention to this. I got more important things to do. Because when I went to college, I was a political science major, and I was always very interested in politics, and I really just don't want to be. Yeah, the word sorrows means birth pangs. So from that, they extrapolate the idea. And not without reason. I mean, I understand. These are the beginning of birth pangs. They come together more and more frequently. You know what? That... Do I think there's going to be like a lead up to the tribulation where we have these famines and pestilences and earthquakes kind of becoming more and more frequent? No, I don't think so. I think the beginning of birth pangs, if you know anything about birth, you know this. There's false labor. That women have contractions ahead of time. A birth pang here and a birth pang there is not any sign of the beginning of birth. It is when they come sustained, right? When you get to sustained, consistent pains. And those have to do with the things that come next. Diverse earthquakes and wars and rumors of wars here and there, scattered, as we've had. When people are looking for this ramping up slowly of disasters and stuff. But if you look at the book of Revelation, what happens is it just comes on hard. Labor can come on hard, too. When he says at the beginning of sorrows, what I think is referring to is the uncertainty, because he's saying, don't be troubled at these things. The book of Revelation, the trumpets, I think, give the most, I want to say the most certain signs. Certainly if you're looking for outward things. But of course, my interpretation of that could be wrong. As anyone knows, when I interpret the trumpets, I interpret the first few trumpets as, I suggest that they are literal. And that they refer to like certain kinds of disasters that we haven't seen in human history, because they'd be so devastating as to block out the sun, for God knows how long. The sun is going to be darkened. The sun and the moon will be darkened. I mean, that's what it says. And it's going to be due to, at least according, if you interpret the trumpets, literally all is going to be due to some sort of meteor or comet or asteroid strike. I think if actually an asteroid, if it hits the Earth, it becomes a meteor. I forget. How big is it going to hit? It's going to hit in the sea, and it's going to be pretty big, but not so big as to destroy the world. In fact, I don't know. I should consult with a scientist. I'm saying, if the sun's light was to be diminished by a third part, how big would the meteor have to be if it struck in the sea? If that was like the measure. And I bet there are probably people who could calculate like how big of a stone would do that. It's not a planet killer, but it is a devastating thing. And I've always said that, if something like that happens, you might want to pay close attention to what happens afterwards, because it's probably going to be something pretty, it's going to be the end of the world, actually. Whether it be, well, yeah, it's going to be the end of the world. But that doesn't get mentioned here, because after that there will be all kinds of horrors playing out on the earth, all kinds of plagues, pestilences, earthquakes, famines, but like the world has never seen. That's the onset of birth. These other things are like Braxton Hicks contractions. I remember that. There's just sort of these contractions that happen before you deliver your baby. They don't mean the baby is about to be born. They just mean you're very pregnant. So that's my take on that. People feel free to disagree, but certainly on this point, that there, people disagree about it. Like I said, about the frequency of natural disasters. A lot of times they're looking on the very short term. It's like when they decrease, and plus not only that, you're talking about stuff that has not been accurately recorded, except in the past 100 years. Even then, 100 years, maybe 75, I don't know, in all parts of the world. It's like we are having a greater amount of information now than ever before. Sorry, I had an itchy nose. So, who can say? Before we continue, let's just look at this for a second. Subscribe to Line by Line Bible Studies, and there's my website. There's my other YouTube channel, which is going to be primarily focused on song, and I will eventually move the Bible studies and that thing over here. And then there's this. If you have questions, send them to questions@oraclesofgod.org. I'm checking the pop-out chat right now. I call it pop-out because I pop it out. But it's the live chat. There's no questions there. And then if you, I realize I don't think I checked my Gmail or my email for questions since last week. But again, do I do it right now? I just think it's a sloppy thing I do here. Yes, indeed. I'll just grab it. There we go. Okay. I'm going to check that in a minute. There's the text. I'll just quickly. Okay. No new messages. All right. No questions currently. That's just fine. Then shall they deliver you up to be afflicted, and shall kill you, and ye shall be hated of all nations for my name's sake. And then shall many be offended, and shall betray one another. I'm going to double interpret the last part, okay? Because I'm willing to admit I could be wrong about this. Yeah, I mean, don't be dogmatic about it. I'm not. Or I have been, certainly, but, I just give a very... This is the way it is. And I'm going to be like, well, maybe not. But that's all right. I don't have a lot of pride in my interpretation because I'm just trying to get it right. So there's another way in which you could take this. Just in passing, it's important to, like I've always said, it's better to understand all the interpretations. Now, I may favor one over the other, but that doesn't mean it isn't worth exploring other interpretations, because it's good to know it in your mind. Say, like, well, you know what? Like, you have reality come in, like things start happening, and you're like, well, that interpretation that I dismissed is now much more believable because of the evidence of what occurs in the world. So, and he's saying, don't be troubled. These things, but it's not the end. But these are part of the end. But you shouldn't be troubled about it. You know what I mean? It's like, this is not the end, the wars and rumors of wars. Don't be troubled about the wars and rumors of wars, about the famines and pestilences. I guess cause it's like I said earlier, and I did sort of cover this, but I'm going to just give it a little more gracious twist on it. In the end, there are wars. In the end, there are famines and pestilences. I mean, the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. One of them has a pair of balances in his hand, a measure of wheat for a penny, 2 measures of barley for a penny, and then the one that goes forth, he that sat on him was death, and hell followed with him. Wait, I guess famine and pestilence go together. What the heck is a pestilence, by the way? I'm just thinking of, like, what is that word? Why have I never looked it up? Maybe I have. Maybe I have looked that up. I'm just suddenly like, okay, thanks. I looked it up and it says, pestilence, loimos. You know what the definition is? Pestilence. It says pestilence or a pest. So we get a word pest from pestilence. So it's some sort of insect-borne thing. But it could also be virulent outbreaks of diseases, I guess. Bugs? I don't know. Well, yeah, you know, I think of it more as the animal-born thing. Like, I'm thinking of in the 7 seals. And power was given to them over the 4th part of the earth to kill with the sword and with hunger and with death and the beasts of the earth. That's the pestilence. Like a plague of locusts is a pestilence. Or a plague of flies. And the disease they bring. So, what I was getting at is, it could mean in a sense that, wars and rumors of wars in and of themselves, and famines and pestilences in and of themselves are not the end. So don't be troubled by these things. But they are part of the end. Certainly they are. I'm not denying that. I'm just saying, like, to say that it is, that what you should look for to signal the end times is a steady increase in the number of earthquakes or pestilences or whatever is not really correct. What it often says is it will come on them suddenly, like travail upon a woman with child. And they say, well, it's the beginning of sorrow. It's a slower thing. It's like, yeah, it does get worse as you go along. But while the end can be compared to travail, what I object to is people saying, before the end begins, there'll be this building up of natural disasters. And no. What's going to happen is the end will begin, and it will get worse and worse till it's over. So while those things are definitely part of the end times, there's no, preamble to the end times based on steadily increasing natural disasters. That is a false teaching. That's not in the Bible. Then shall they deliver you up to be afflicted, and shall kill you, and you shall be hated of all nations for my name's sake. And here's the thing about the end times, and I might do Revelation again sometime soon. I know it would be popular as far as I'd get views, whatever, and possible subscriptions, and that's fine, because I do want people to listen, I guess. I am ambivalent about that. On some degree, I just feel like I like the anonymity and the just quietly building up the stuff. I get more excitement just seeing week after week of study, hour after hour of work go out, and the numbers don't really matter, because it's not about the numbers, it's about my own commitment. As far as from my end, that's all that matters to me, is my own commitment to what I do. But here's the thing. They're going to hate you. And that's not easy. You think about it. It sounds romantic, right? Against you against the world. I mean, it's always appealed to me. But then, mostly because of my hatred for the world, it appealed to me. Because I wanted to stand in opposition, as long as God would stand with me, right? But even if God is with you, it's not so easy to stand. I can prove it. Look at did not Peter walk on the water with the Lord? Right in front of him, he could see him. Lord, can I come out to you on the water? Sure. He walks on. He's walking on the water. He's already doing it. And then, even though the Lord is standing right there, he sees all the sea and the waves roaring. Do you know in the book of Revelation, the sea on which the woman sitting on the beast, and the beast is sitting on the waters which thou sawest, are peoples and multitudes and nations and tongues. I mean, I'm not saying there's a one-to-one correlation. I'm just saying, but there is the prophetic meaning. The world is going to be carrying along this false Messiah. There are false, Christians coming, but there's also a false Messiah. And now, the form of the false Messiah, for many years, I believe the false Messiah would be Satan himself cast out of heaven. It's described in the book of Revelation. There's a lot of evidence in the New Testament and the Old, which can be marshaled to make that case. I can make a very strong case for that. That doesn't mean it's correct. You know what I mean? Judas, it says, have I not chosen one of you 12, or have I not chosen you 12, and one of you is a devil? Speaking of Judas. And it says that Satan entered into him. And I remember hearing people, more traditional Christians talking about prophecy, that their belief that the Antichrist would be a man who was possessed of Satan. And you know what? That could be. It could be. I've also thought about the possibility of a false Antichrist. Now there's your double mental mind worm. Basically the idea of there would be a Antichrist-like figure, like a man, let's say. This is speculation. But it's possible that there would be a figure that would be kind of have an antichrist-like rise, a man who started to be the first world leader. And then Satan appears as an angel from heaven, as Jesus from heaven, actually, and maybe destroys that guy, and then he comes in and does his Antichrist routine. That's a bit diabolical. But there's there's one sure way to tell the difference between Christ and Antichrist. When Christ returns, well, I was going to say there's no opposition. Well, there is initial opposition, but I don't think it's because they know they're opposing him. They're gathered together to oppose him and for that purpose. And then he appears and goes right at them and destroys them. But of course, the thing that you got to remember is that when Jesus returns, there will be resurrection. While he's still in the air. He's not going to come down on the earth without having raised us, without having changed us. And so he returns, we will be caught up together with him in the clouds to meet him in the air. And not then go back to heaven as the rapture teaches, but rather we will be united there with the resurrected dead, and then in company are all supposed to return to earth. That's the teaching. If that's what we are expecting, it makes anyone trying to be a Messiah, it puts them in a very difficult position if they don't have the power to raise the dead. If they're Satan, or if they're a man, or a presumptive alien. A lot of times people have a lot of theories. It's going to be an alien. It's going to be this. It's going to be that. It's like, you don't know what it's going to be. Let me put it that way, just to start with. But you ought to know what it's going to be like. People are so focused on the nature of Antichrist, you can deceive yourself. It's like, well, I thought Antichrist was going to be this way. And then it isn't. And that causes you to doubt everything. That's why if I'm still flesh and blood, and if I haven't been transformed, and the dead have not been raised, then whatever Messiah is present is not Jesus, no matter what he says, no matter what he does. He has power to call down fire from heaven, it says in the book of Revelation. That the Antichrist will have a supernatural, or at least seeming supernatural power to call fire out of heaven on the earth and the sight of men. He will do great wonders. We gotta understand this is going to be so convincing. Whatever it is, whatever form it takes, he's going to be so convincing that the majority of the human beings in the world are going to follow after him. Right? And if you are going to stand against that and object to that and to declare that that is not the true Messiah, if you're going to put yourself in that position, you're going to be hated like no one has ever been hated in history. Like if you go to, if you go places where, if you've confronted people with doctrinal differences or with just ideological differences, just differences, and you've been hated, I don't much like it myself, to tell you the truth. I've been hated, or let's say disliked deeply. I don't know if it ever I wouldn't want to insult those people and say it rose to the level of hate. I don't think they thought that much of me. So I don't think they could have hated me. But, they certainly had some sort of ill will towards me. And I didn't much care for it. You gotta understand that it will be the most compelling deception mankind has ever seen. And resisting it, the Lord Jesus says, and I know he says it in Mark 13, but if the days had not been shortened, Even the elect would be deceived. Even those God had chosen to not be deceived would be deceived if it was allowed to go on long enough. That's how deceitful it's going to be. That's how tempting it's going to be. It's called the hour of temptation. It says we've been given to escape the hour of temptation. Some people think that's through the rapture. But I think it's through, rather, the Lord in His Spirit keeping us. Him just doing extraordinary for us. Allowing us to not be deceived. Keeping us... It's like I've said this before, that there were times when I felt like I was almost going to lose my faith. But I couldn't lose it. I couldn't stop believing. You know? And so, I maintained the faith because the Lord wouldn't let me go. At least I attribute that to Him. It's like I kind of wanted to just quit, or it would have felt easier maybe. I don't know. It's not easy, in the face of, you look at Peter, he got to walk on the water and he doubted. So I never walked on water. I've tried to make analogies to my life to walking on water, and I felt at times like I was sort of in an improbable situation where I felt like, well, I should sink. Why am I still afloat? Why am I still here? I'm still here. It should have all gone downhill for me at that point, and there should be nothing left. And yet, the Lord held me up, and so maintained my, I don't know what, my continued faith and belief in Him. But it's like, that's important to go through things like that and to survive them. Because to be able to stand up against the things that are coming is going to require more faith than you have access to. So, while the Lord keeps us, right? The Lord keeps us. I want you to be mindful of the temptation of Christ, where the devil said, hey, it is written, He will give His angels charge over you, that they will keep you in all your ways, and lest at any time thou dash thy foot against a stone. Nothing can hurt you. The Lord will keep you. So be foolish. Be reckless. Throw yourself off the temple. And so it is also that if we are neglectful of our salvation, if we are neglectful of following the Lord, we can find ourselves completely, under siege, and not having formed a deep relationship with God, we can find ourselves completely deceived, thinking we can't be deceived. It's like thinking we find ourselves completely crushed by gravity because we thought we couldn't be crushed by gravity. We can't fall off the temple. We can fall off the temple. We can't get hurt. We're on the temple. We're in the place of God, and we know God. We believe in Him. No evil can come upon us. No deceit can befall us. The pressure to conform to this coming kingdom is going to be incredible. And let me say this. I was getting at it before, and I got a little sidetracked, but the Antichrist, whatever form it takes, if it's just a man, whatever, it's the Antichrist, because in this, when the world begins to coalesce around a single world leader, that man is most likely Antichrist. Or, like I said, if it's an anti-Antichrist, the supernatural entity that comes afterwards, if there be no accompanying miracles or things that could be sort of contrived to be miracles, the main thing is to understand that when the Lord Jesus comes, He comes with the power of resurrection. Anything that comes out of the sky without that power, anything that comes up out of the earth without that power, out of the sea, is not the Lord Jesus. and should not be feared. Well, it will be fearsome. And then people will betray one another. Because here's the thing. When Antichrist comes, I don't plan on just running out my door and start telling people I don't believe it's the Messiah. I'm not going to, it's like, you want to do that? Expose yourself, right? No, people are going to betray you. I suspect he's not a true believer. They're going to betray one another and hate each other. Because there's nothing more hateful. Like I said, when you're deceived, when the Antichrist comes, see, like I said, the disasters that are going to befall the earth before he appears are horrific. The earth is going to be darkened. Everything's going to be awful. It's like the major catastrophe is going to befall the earth. And the Antichrist is going to come after that. And everyone is going to want to believe that this is the guy who has all the answers. This is the person who's going to save us all. And when you start saying no, you're going to be hated. How dare you? How can you? How could you? And many false prophets shall rise, and shall deceive many. And because iniquity shall abound, the love of many shall wax cold. Many false prophets shall rise and shall deceive many. That's underway. And of course, at those times, it's going to be even worse. And because iniquity shall abound, the love of many shall wax cold. It's like I said, sometimes people, how is that so? How is it that the abundance of iniquity causes love to go down? Because the way they portray it in society today is that, there's nothing more loving you can do than tolerate iniquity. Or celebrate iniquity, actually. The iniquitous desire no longer to be tolerated. I remember when they used to preach tolerance. Then it became acceptance. And now it is subjection. You will be subject to iniquity. I mean, you know what I'm talking? I'm talking like, it was one time when they said, you've got to accept our sinfulness. And then, or you must tolerate our sinfulness, which I got no problem with that. I don't, but I know in the past it was not tolerated. Certain forms of iniquity. It's always that way. Men have like some things they tolerate and other things they don't. Even the ungodly have like, well, we don't allow that. And that's what it gets to. We want to be tolerated. Okay, now we want to be accepted. No, we don't want to accept it. Oh, you don't want to accept it? Well, now you will be subject to this, or you have committed iniquity. You know what I mean? Like, not only do you need to accept it, you must celebrate it. And if you are not part of the celebration, you are evil, essentially. It's wickedness, not to celebrate. What you are doing is iniquity. And in the midst of that kind of environment, like that's where we're moving into. Where you're not allowed to speak against certain things, or your entire life becomes ruined potentially. Where if you speak against a certain kind of behavior, well, you're kicked off all the platforms online, and then it's hateful. It's all these things, and then you're expelled from society, and not only that, you may get repercussions at work. You're fired because of the pressure of these wicked, iniquitous people who have given themselves over to the most perverse of sins. So you are, and so what does that do to you? Well, I'll tell you what, it makes me, you know what? I won't say anything then. I won't I got nothing to say about your iniquity. Burn in hell. Except don't expect me to warn you to flee from the wrath to come. You know, it makes you just feel like, yeah, I don't want to do anything for these people. I don't want to help them. I don't want to save them. I just want to see them destroyed. When iniquity gets out of control, that's what it does to you. It makes you feel like, you know what? So the idea of preaching repentance now is, I don't care about it. I just want to see judgment. That's what it starts making people feel. You don't want to see the sinner turn from his sinful ways, as Jesus taught us, but rather you want to see the sinner destroyed. When iniquity gets out of control, that's what it starts doing, because even the righteous can't bear it. Because even our righteousness is taken from us. Because even in trying to speak up about the things going on in society that are destroying it, you are prevented, and you are made an offender for having spoken up what you think to be the truth. And the more iniquity abounds, the more the love of the righteous is cold. That's the way I look at it. There are other ways you could interpret that verse, obviously. The abundance of iniquity makes love go cold. Of course, their love also goes cold, right? As they get more and more victories, those who are, people who are given over to sin and iniquity, the more they're allowed to get away with it, the more they are given prioritized, is that the word I want? Preferential, or let's say power to punish people who speak out against them, the more wicked they become. And their own love is, I guess I have a hard time saying like, oh, because they're allowed to get away with all this iniquity, their love goes cold. Yeah, well, I don't know how much their love is worth, to tell you the truth. They love not the truth. They love it. It's like, and like I said, to me, it's like, I'm the one, from this perspective, those who love righteousness have true love in my mind, as far as, which is this, wanting what's best for other people. That is love. Wanting people to feel good is not love. It's cold love. It's like saying, like, I want you to feel good because I don't care about you. I just want you to feel good, so you leave me alone. Just leave me alone. Like, getting involved in your life and trying to help you straighten things out is the furthest thing from my interests. So I have no love for you. That's what it does. It's just a temptation. We shouldn't give ourselves over to that. But it will be a drag. It is a drag already. At least, and this is axiomatic. This applies anytime, not just at the end times. But if you can imagine, as things get worse and worse, the abundance of iniquity causes much love to go cold. As the murderers are multiplying, and lawlessness abounds, you become less willing to help other people. Because of the risk. Not just to rebuke sinners, but just to help people in general, just to show kindness to people. Because, like, I remember, this can be observed in times of war. Like in Vietnam, where, or even in the Middle East today, like where you have wars zones taking place, where women and children are also present, and they are being used in the war effort, where it's not just men fighting men and what's going on, but where, a child can be bait for a trap, or a woman could have bombs strapped to her. You become disinclined to be helpful to people because, hey, I don't want to be killed because of my compassion. Why should I be killed for my compassion? Why not just, maybe before they get closer, I should just put a bullet through their head. And then I'll be safe. And otherwise, and then I was like, oop, well, I guess it was, I feel bad. There was no bomb. But, you know, my buddy died last week because the kid that came over him and brought him over to see some sick person, the house blew up. You know, whatever. He that shall endure to the end, the same shall be saved. Well, we're going to start there tomorrow because there's a lot to be said about that. Yeah, I don't need to remind myself. I already know. So, yep, we'll pick up at verse 13 tomorrow. Thanks for joining me in this study. I look forward to studying with you again, like I said, tomorrow. Until then.
And there was given me a reed like unto a rod. And the angel stood saying, Rise and measure the temple of God.